On the 4th of June this year, 22-year-old Henry Murray was attacked and eaten alive by a great white shark in Cape Town. His death caused a wave of hysteria among those who believe that the great white represents an increasing danger to people. There have been calls for selective culling, even a bounty put on the head of this ancient predator. In 2004, there were 61 confirmed shark attacks in the world, 7 of them fatal. In the same year, over 50 million sharks were killed, including the great white. They were slaughtered by trophy hunters, shark fin fishermen, environmental contamination and entanglement in nets. And in South Africa, despite its protected status, despite the millions it generates annually for tourism, the survival of the great white is threatened most by the falsehoods spread through fear, ignorance and greed. This is where Henry Murray met his horrific end.
The coastline here is known as Miller's Point, probably the mecca for the local diving, scuba diving and spearfishing fraternity. And on the day Henry Murray was taken, just on the inside of this rock here, literally 150 meters from the shore, it was 3:45 in the afternoon, on a Saturday afternoon, and young Henry had already, I think, just shot a garrick over here, and to his misfortune he had the fish still tied to his belt.
Henry was the 5th person to be attacked in Cape waters since 2002, and the 2nd fatality. Was there a sinister pattern to the attacks?
Sightings in recent times, the last 3.5 years, and altercations or incidents we've had, contacts we've had, would suggest that the shark, or maybe one or two, are persistent and are definitely not guilty of mistaken identity in the attacks they've made and the pattern of attacks.
A former champion swimmer and lifeguard, Godfrey Mock says he now fears for people's safety in this water. He proposes a drastic deterrent.
Well, the very extreme way of breaking the pattern is catch him. If you catch 1, 2, 3 sharks in this area, the word, I imagine, I know people think I'm naive. They say, what are you crediting this animal with, this human intelligence? You know, we'd asked for a license to go and get the shark that took Henry, because Peter van Niekerk's spear was still lodged in its side, and it had been seen as recently as about 10 days ago off Roman Rock, which is where the lighthouse is at Simonstown.
Mock is adamant that he's not exploiting community fears, but there is a huge price on the head of this endangered beast.
I've heard the figure, and these are commercial fishermen telling me that the boys from Florida, as big game fishermen, guys that catch the marlin and the spearfish and the tuna and whatever fish they catch, are prepared to pay, listen to this, $500,000 for a 6-meter buoy. This is not their traditional feeding ground, and any shark that is trespassing along here, and that's perhaps the contentious thing, and that's why guys are cross with me, I'd say catch it.
I think this is a misperception. People think that the sharks stay offshore. We do something to change their behavior. They come inshore and they're looking for us. That's nonsensical. They've been around here for at least maybe 20 million years or so, this particular species. And they normally will go anywhere from essentially the intertidal, and I know places when the tide comes in, they swim around. When the tide goes out, there's no water for them to swim in. So they patrol shallow areas, they patrol deeper areas, they can go far out to sea, go out into the blue water, they can hang around seal islands, they hang around fish banks, they do all sorts of things, but one thing they do is beach patrols.
Linet Companier is a leading shark expert. He was a consultant on the movie Jaws, and he helped secure the protected status of the great white in South Africa, a world first.
But the thing is, the perception is Jaws, is the Jaws monster. And the thing is that you do something and the Jaws monster comes out of the woodwork and starts eating you like some sort of Pac-Man. People that have interest in exploiting it come out of the woodwork and the like, and start proposing all sorts of solutions that quite often have a bit of money involved to essentially exploit this very valuable animal, which has, like the rhino, like the elephant, has a big price on its head. What about danger to the white shark from human activities?
Gift of the Sea. That's what they've dubbed Gansbaai, a tiny coastal hamlet just a 2-hour drive from Cape Town. And indeed, the bountiful gifts of the ocean in the form of tourism and fishing serve as the lifeline for the Gansbaai community. Gansbaai, a town of braaivleis, rugby and great white fever.
If I was a great white, I wouldn't bite you, but I'd swim right next to you. If I was a great white, I wouldn't bite you, but I'd swim right next to you and ask you how you do. Then you look at me and pull out a harpoon and try to shoot me. Then I'd realize how fucking really hungry I am right now. Sorry about your leg, I'll be back in a while for the rest. Don't stress, my sister will be back to clean up this mess.
This is South Africa's premier site for great white tourism.
Obviously you have this, the recreational seasons, which is a bit of an economic boost from, say, November to Easter. And then throughout the rest of the year, industries such as boat-based whale watching and the great white shark industry is probably the biggest non-consumptive industry south of the Limpopo.
In fact, it generates around 40 million rand a year from tourists eager to get up close and almost personal with the great whites. Cage diving has come under fire, though, because of the intrusive methods used to lure the great whites, and there are calls to ban the baiting of great whites. But diver Mike Rutson thinks that cage diving can help dispel the monster myth associated with the great white.
I would like to see white sharks really protected in this country, and the only way I think we can change things and get these animals really protected is by educating the general public about what these animals are.
Diving takes place just off Dyer Island in an area known as Shark Alley. This piece of paradise provides an all-you-can-eat buffet for the great white.
This is an amazing area from multitude of and diversity of marine birds, seals, whales, dolphins, and especially the white shark, which, well, it is probably the best hotspot in the planet for white sharks.
Marine biologist Mike Skoll has been conducting research here on the great white since 1997. But close to Dyer Island, there is an unexpected potential threat. A sea cage farm recently erected in the heart of this great white hotspot. Skoll has raised the alarm. This is the area demarcated for the sea cage farm, just past Kleinbaai Harbour, a kilometre offshore between Danger Point and Dyer Island. It is the site of a Norwegian salmon cage farm called Salmon Solar. Although mariculture is a global industry, this is the first of its kind in South Africa. If it works, our fishing industry could be transformed, and our coastline. It could disrupt shark tourism and have a devastating impact on our marine life and the great white. The Gansbaai farm looks inconspicuous, but even the smallest farm can affect an area 50,000 times larger than the physical farm itself. This fish is a harmless wild indigenous species. By contrast, farmed alien salmon is among the most contaminated fish, containing high levels of cancer-causing chemicals.
One of the things that we know that white sharks accumulate a fair amount of is mercury. We have another thing, concentration of certain other chemicals like polychlorinated biphenyls.
These cancer-causing agents are distributed right through the marine food chain, landing up ultimately in our stomachs. The damage is unseen at first, but the long-term effects of mariculture are still unknown. Global protests have forced multinationals to clean up their act. In Norway, for example, companies claim to vaccinate every single farmed salmon, but disease, death and contamination are still a problem. In British Columbia, Atlantic salmon are now reproducing like rats in rivers, something salmon farmers said could never happen. And in Australia, the net is now closing on reckless companies. Entanglement of great whites and seals is now recognised as a major threat, and aquaculture permits are being withheld if farms are located anywhere near great white hotspots. So given these risks, why did South Africa climb aboard the Mariculture boat?
We see this as an important economic opportunity in that it can create jobs. We see this also as an opportunity to reduce the pressure on our wild stocks. We see this also as an opportunity to provide a protein source for our local coastal communities.
Yet in mariculture, there are no more jobs now than there were 10 years ago. Multinationals reap most of the rewards, and smoked salmon is not yet on the menu of disadvantaged communities.
We would like to see mariculture work in this area. We really would. We think it could potentially take a lot of pressure off the indigenous resources or the natural, the wild resources. But then if you look at an intensive feed farming project like this, or many other line fish or fin fish industries, the amount of indigenous or wild fish that are caught and used to produce the feed for these fish sort of outweigh the benefits of such a facility. So you're killing several tons of anchovies or mullet or whatever it might be, to feed an alien species in the sea to provide a fish on the table. It's quite a bizarre circle of events. They were asked to move the facility from the Romansbaai location, which they got permission for originally, Romansbaai, west of Danger Point. The abalone industry was upset and said that the potential risk for contamination through the inlet pipes was too high. Marine Coastal Management agreed and instructed them to move to this current location. So by doing that, they actually implicated that there is a risk of contamination.
It's such a sensitive environment, and there's so many predators in the area that it's kind of unthinkable of putting nets in this area to grow salmons or any fish for that matter. And my biggest fear is that sharks, seals, birds will get entangled in those nets, and obviously dolphins and whales could also be entangled in those nets, because there is, as far as I know, no preventive measures to kind of alert the cetaceans to stay away.
Entanglement of great whites in farm nets has become such an explosive issue that countries such as New Zealand have suspended mariculture ventures until the danger of entanglement has been adequately addressed.
With white sharks, we got about I think a near 70% fatality rate on those nets. The shark netters try to service their nets as often as possible, but sometimes because of bad weather conditions, they stay out for days at a time, in which case any sharks get killed.
An environmental assessment must be done to assess the risks. Being a first in South Africa, the environmental report could only speculate on the risks.
The authorities obviously had enough information at their disposal to pass a decision, issue a record of decision based on the information in the scoping report.
My brief was to assess the environmental impact in terms of what was the effluent, what was the visual, what was the any other impacts there may be on the mammals in the area, and I got specialists in to do that.
But the major impacts could only be assessed from the experiment itself and through strict monitoring.
I think in terms of this study, or this project, we did say that the monitoring had to be public, and it had to be available to public if they wanted to see the results of the monitoring, because it's so new in this country.
To be able to do a proper environmental impact assessment, you need to have a proper monitoring that is established, and that monitoring needs to be independent. And that is one of the big problems I have with the farm, is that there is, as far as I can see, no such monitoring in place.
We decided to visit the farm. We'd been told that not only was there already damage to the cages, but that the salmon had suffered high mortalities. And yet there did not seem to be any public community report backs on the monitoring of the farm.
You know, it's winter time now, so you would expect rougher seas with the winter storms coming in. There appears to have been some structural damage. This we picked up a few days ago, and there has been some repair activities on site. We can't confirm, but this is another thing. There's very little communication, if any at all, between the operators of that facility and the authorities. If the structure is damaged, or if there is high mortalities of this fish, we would like to know what the cause is. Is it sharks damaging this thing? Is it dolphins damaging these facilities to get to the food source, the protein source inside? And it's important that to our department that the structural design has taken into account the high frequency of predators in the area, large predators, seals, sharks, dolphins, etc., and also the prevention of contamination from the pesticides, hormones, antibiotics, etc., that would concentrate in the feces of these fish.
What we discovered was disturbing. The central cage in which the salmon were kept appeared to be sinking. Layers of algae had spread over the top and sides, and there appeared to be few, if any, fish inside. The picture was even murkier underwater. Had most of the fish escaped? Had they been eaten by a great white? As we were about to leave, we were confronted by the fish farm boss and her 2 employees. They were extremely aggressive towards us. We later discovered firsthand that one of the employees is a self-confessed poacher. The other accidentally offered one of our informants $100,000 to catch him a great white. And when we reached shore, one of the employees threatened to assault us and charge us with trespassing and malicious damage to property. Marine biologist Mike Skoll has since been charged. We contacted the Norwegian owner of the company and his South African counterpart to find out what was going on. But after initially agreeing to be interviewed, both refused because of what they described as our agenda. Really perplexed now, we asked the Department of Environmental Affairs if there was a law preventing us from visiting the farm.
I don't see any law why you should be prevented to go there.
Suddenly, an experimental project that was supposed to be for the benefit of the community seemed about as transparent as a marshland. Our fears were reinforced by a Gansbaai conservationist who had initially been supportive of the project.
One morning I approached the farm lady now, and I introduced myself. I said to her that I'm a marine conservationist, I do boat-based whale watching, whatever, and I would very much like to sit down with her about contingency plans. She was incredibly arrogant. They can do what they want. They don't have to sit down with anybody. If that is what they want to do, then I'm very worried about what's going to happen. How can we be in such an incredibly sensitive system and they're not willing to sit around a table having coffee and talk to me about conservation?
Already the farm has become a safety hazard.
The structures lie right on the water surface. There were no navigation beacons, flotation marker buoys, lights, radar reflectors of any nature, and at one stage there was a thick mooring rope of probably 100-150 meters long that was trailing behind this thing in the currents, and our patrol boat did drive into this rope. We approached SAMHSA. SAMHSA then issued an instruction, and we've noticed that there are 2 marker buoys up now which wouldn't be visible at night. You must also remember that there's quite a high frequency of commercial and recreational fishing vessels in this area after hours as well, in the darkest hours of the night, not to mention the poachers, of course. And it basically constitutes a serious shipping hazard.
I mean, most boats that leave Kleinbay Harbour are one whale watching boat, shark cage diving boats, and local fishermen. Neither of those 3 types of boats carry radars, for example.
Well, I would have thought that the lights were probably one of the most basic things that had to be implemented, and probably the most simple implementation. It tells me that if we made that a condition or a recommendation in our EIA, it tells me that I should be concerned that possibly there's not sufficient monitoring going on the site.
But Marine and Coastal Management insist the experimental farm is being properly managed and monitored.
Well, certain components such as the environmental side, we take an active part and we do much of the sampling ourselves. We request that they do some of the sampling because some of the sampling is in fact done on a daily basis.
The farm employees are supposed to report sightings of great whites and cases of entanglement, but one must question whether they take this seriously given what we've already learnt about them. And environmentalists describe sea cage farming as the marine equivalent of battery chicken farming. Did the fish die from overcrowding?
I mean, last year they brought probably about 70,000 eggs into the country. These are disease-free certified eggs. And all along they've suffered mortalities. As I said, there's probably only 12,000 fish on the farm now. So the claim by the farmers at the moment is the fact that the fish have, their health has been poor owing to the conditions in which they were brought up as juveniles. They do report some upper structural damage.
And what do they ascribe that to?
They believe it's people coming onto the farm, observers or public, etc.
We have to ask, has this company been given a license to pollute, endanger the great white shark, and possibly pull out, leaving us to clean up the mess? And why has government been so laid back about such risky business?
This is a pioneering venture in this country. It's also new to us, so we drafted the permit conditions very generally. In terms of that environmental monitoring, we thought there would be the specifics around the diseases, around the entanglement, around the sediment sampling, etc., to find out what is the rate of impact, of this initiative on the marine environment, etc.
Someone was really not thinking when they issued the permits. Maybe you want to get it away from the concentration of white sharks, even though it's kind of hard to avoid them up and down the coast anywhere, since they're all over the place. But the thing is, there are certain places that are white shark sites, what we call, and those things you tend to see more white sharks and the like because they come in. Dyer Island is a bit like a white shark, say, supermarket for seals, basically. But there's other things around there that they can also eat, and so putting it right near there and the like doesn't make much sense.
I think it's very dangerous to jeopardize the tourism industry in Gansbaai to create a new industry that could have very, potential problems and direct impacts on the local environment. In our society, I would say that whenever there's an invisible pollution that doesn't have an immediate effect, people kind of tend to ignore it, even though it can create big problems in the long term. Those pollutants have a way of accumulating themselves either on the ground level or through the food chain, and that might lead to problems much later.